I think you're on, Peter.
Well, we've got, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We've got participants joining as we are here now. We're up to 70. It's like watching a vote count in America. It's going up. And we'll start, as soon as we get the right numbers on here, we'll start the session. But it's great. We've got some 300 people registered and we have a great panel. The good news is I'm not on the panel. I'm just facilitating it. So we'll get people who will make some sense as we go along. We're up to 100 now. And I want to congratulate OZEDI and certainly David Field and his team for putting this together. And we'll come to that as we get towards the end of this. I'll do some housekeeping in a minute. I'll just wait till we get a few more minutes or seconds until we get people on board. E-invoicing, it is such a thing. I've been around it for a long time. Every panel member's been around it for a long time, and it's the future and the present, and it's how we're going to make things happen in the new world. I think we can move to housekeeping now. I think so. This session is scheduled to go for about 45 minutes, and then there'll be another 15 minutes for Q&A. As all the attendees, or you're all muted, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom platform to ask questions throughout the session. I think a lot of people are probably used to that now, but you've got a capacity there to ask questions on your Zoom. We'll try and answer as many as we can in the allotted time. And you should know this session is being recorded and will be available to all attendees when it's all finished. So that's really good news. So without further ado, unless I'm missing something, I think we can move into the actual session itself. I'm going to do a short introduction of each panelist. So first of all, we have Martin Payne. He's an Assistant Commissioner, Digital Partnerships and Strategy, Enterprise Solutions and Technology. Public servants always have very long names for what they do at the Australian Taxation Office. And we work very closely with the ATO on so many different things, and this has been one of them. We have Kate Carnell, who of course is the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman. Welcome, Kate. And obviously we do lots of work with Kate, and Kate has been a great champion for not just policy, but about process and making sure process gets right. Brady Dever, a partner in PwC Sydney Indirect Taxes Practice with a specialist focus on technology. And that's a great specialist focus for anybody in this age. And then we have David Field, I mentioned before, co-founder, director of OZEDI and advisor to the Security Committee of the GNGB. And David and I have known each other again for a very long time and done a lot of work together around different issues. It's a great panel. And I'm going to ask each of them as we go through, or we're going to talk to each of them. But first of all, we're going to spend a little bit of time just making sure we know what e-invoicing is, because a lot of people get confused. David, you know what it is?
Well, I would hope so. I'll give you my version of what I think e-invoicing is. And today is not a tech session. It's we're going to stay away from the technology aspect of it. This is all about the business side of things and what the business case is for e-invoicing. In short, it's the adoption by the Australian and New Zealand governments of an international invoicing standard called PEPOL, which stands for the Pan-European Public Procurement Online, which is a real mouthful, so we call it PEPOL. It's quite a mature standard, been around for quite a long time, and we have created a version of it with Australian GST and New Zealand GST built into it to cover the Australian operations. What you can see e-invoicing with is really like a collection of secure network of digital post offices. Under this, a business owns a digital mailbox with one of those digital post offices, and all your invoices are sent and received by that one mailbox. So unlike EDIs that exist today, where there's a zillion standards and the different ways of implementing it, it's just one single standard. So when you send an invoice, your software will put it in a digital envelope with a digital address on the envelope and will deposit it at your post office. And as you would do with a normal sort of invoice if you put an envelope. The digital envelope will be pushed through the network of post office to its finally delivery point, and when the response comes back from your customer, it will be put into your mailbox for collection or delivery to you. And you might be looking at this and saying, well, I've got a digital address I have to find. You don't need to worry about that. The only thing you need to be able to send and receive in the PEPAL network is the ABN of the sender, which is you, and the ABN of the receiver, which is your customer. The software will do the rest of the work for you in terms of routing it and delivering it. So what does it mean in practical terms? Look, as I said, it's about hitting send in your invoicing software and knowing that literally within minutes, that invoice will be sitting in your customer's accounting system, ready to be approved for payment. So it certainly speeds up the delivery and the actual accuracy of the data that is getting there, because you've got data that is produced by your accounting system and it goes straight into the accounting system of the receiving party. So it's if it's been fully implemented, which is what we're hoping that most of the software providers and these other software providers that are in the e-invoicing marketplace are going to do, is that you get a response saying that your customer has received the invoice. And that's certainly a lot more than you do with getting sending a PDF at the moment, where you never really know if it does get there or if it disappears into a mailbox somewhere and never gets looked at. The PEPAL network has the capability of sending back a response so that you know that your invoice has actually been received. On the other side of the coin, it's about automating your accounts payable software. What this means is that you can receive all of your invoices in one single format coming into your accounts payable system. They'll be automatically entered into your system so that there's no need to key any more data into it. And you not only save the time doing that, but this allows you to input all of the invoice line data as well. You'll have all of that. Every invoice line can be imported into your accounting payable software as well. So that's certainly going to cut down a lot of time. And I can only repeat what my physio said to me a few years ago, where he said, my dream would be that I go home on Saturday afternoon when I shut the practice, and I can sit out at the computer and I can see all my invoices in one spot, and I can go tick, 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 flick them off to my bookkeeper and they'll get paid. We are now at that point where that is a more than feasible concept to grasp. The other thing about this is you look at things like, if you've ever done a house renovation, you know you have a bunch of tradies working for you that have got a glove box full of receipts. And this will enable them to sort of go down to their local plumbing store or their local hardware store, and when they buy anything, instead of shoving something into their glove box, they'll go home and find that that data is already sitting in their accounting system, recorded and ready for them to approve. We've got other clients that we're doing this with, and the ease of implementation with it can be, again, exemplified by a pilot that we're running in New Zealand with a large government agency. The first supplier we brought on board for that, we normally would just do this remotely, but they would do this by themselves remotely, but we booked a phone call with them to walk them through the process. Took 5 minutes. They were running Xero, and with our Xero integration, it took 5 minutes for them to actually get up and running with the invoicing and send their first invoice to this government body. The other 25 minutes we spent talking about COVID and the weather in Wellington. It's designed really, and I think with Kate and Peter on the call, who were involved with the Digital Business Council when it was first set up, as I was, that focus was on creating a system which was going to be available at very low cost to every small business. EDI has been predominantly the realm of large business. This is focused on making it available to every business in Australia at an affordable price. Just closing, it's not just invoices. The PEPOL standard also includes purchase orders, remittance advices, delivery dockets, catalogues, quotations, everything you need with a full procure-to-pay network. But we're not going to complicate this to start off with. We're doing e-invoicing to start with, and then we'll move on to the other documents over the ensuing years. So that's my introduction to it. I hope that's covered the basic concepts of it, and I'll hand it back to Peter.
And thanks, David. And I mean, it took me a while, I must admit. I don't know how you went, Kate, to get my head around it. We're going back a few years now to get my head around it. And I mean, the great thing is, from a small business point of view, I wish I had it when I ran mine, is it's just more time for me. I don't know, Kate, you want to add? I mean, from a small business point of view, it's the description, you know, you're going to have more time to yourself.
That's absolutely right, Peter. It's both time, but it's also money, because I think it was really interesting back in those early days when I suppose some of the initial work was done to try to convince Treasury it was a good idea. When we were out working to do that, you know, the figures were pretty dramatic. You know, that fundamentally the cost of processing a paper-based invoice was just over $30. If it was a PDF, it was about $28. And if it was an e-invoice, it was under $10.
Yeah.
So it's $20 difference, you know, from what we're doing now to what it costs then. Now that work was done a few years ago, but you know, all that will have happened is that those figures will be more dramatic than they were back then. So, you know, if you can save $20 on every single invoice you pay, that's pretty important. So it saves you time and it saves you money. And, you know, we'll talk a bit more about this later, but I think increasingly small businesses are really worried about the cybersecurity issues, and we hear dreadful stories about invoices being intercepted. You know, you've sent it to the person that you want to pay you, and the invoice is intercepted, and the BSB and the account numbers changed, and you know as we heard a horrible story the other day of a tradie that was that sent a $50,000 invoice. It was intercepted and the money went straight to someone else. You know, that can't happen in this space, and that's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. So I suppose it ends up being time, money, but also security in a world that's becoming, you know, harder and harder to be sure that things you send online actually, you know, get to the right person and don't get intercepted.
Yeah, thanks. And I mean, the interesting thing, because all, as you say, we'll talk about it later, but it's so important. But the government mandate is the other really interesting thing. And Brady Dever and David Field, we know as part of the $800 million digital package that the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, announced in the budget, he actually mandated that all Commonwealth entities, all of them, must adopt e-invoicing. That's a big call. There have been targets thrown around like 80%. David, you might be closer to this, and certainly Brady, and some dates earlier than 2022. So can you give us some insight into this mandating side of it and what the government's up to there, Brady?
Sure. So it was a pretty significant announcement, and I think one of the things that struck me, and I did post on LinkedIn at about 11:30 on budget night. Actually, it was kind of buried at page 400 of budget paper 2, and it was sort of 2 lines, but they're pretty significant. And so, but basically, you're 100% right, Peter. So what the government has done is requiring that all federal government agencies by 2022 have an PEPOL e-invoicing channel available to be used by suppliers who provide goods and services to government. So that is significant, right? Because what that's doing is the government's obviously putting its, you know, commitment or its money where its mouth is, so to speak, and adopt the e-invoicing, you know, protocol of its own right. Really significantly, and we're seeing a lot of interest in this on the suppliers who provide goods and services to government in the private sector space, is government has accompanied that commitment with a 5-day payment promise. So if you issue so if you also, as a supplier to government, adopt PEPL and issue e-invoices to your government customers, your federal government customers, then you'll be paid in 5 days for contracts below $1 million in value. It's a pretty big incentive. I should say that, so PwC, we are going to adopt the PEPL e-invoicing standard. One of the reasons for doing that is obviously the payment incentive. We have contracts with government, as everybody knows. So I think that's a great incentive, and a lot of our clients are already exploring PEPL adoption now, pending any kind of an acceleration of a mandate for business because of that incentive. Alongside that, from a government perspective, the number of state governments are already moving as well. So we know that the New South Wales state government has been on this journey. I think there's sort of 20 or more government agencies in New South Wales that can receive e-invoices and have made a similar commitment to the federal government. We're also aware of pilots commencing in the other state governments, across the country. So I think this momentum around kind of government starting the process is certainly gaining momentum, and a really good first step to a broader business mandate.
Right, thank you. And David, do you want to add anything to that?
Oh no, look, I think it's a really good initiative, because I think the flow-on effect from that is that if a government department supplier gets their software enabled to send an e-invoice to the government, it means their software is then enabled for them to be able to do e-invoicing with any other party, any other business sending or receiving invoices. So it's a really important mandate in order to get the software enabled. With the federal government's got about 100,000 suppliers, I think, which will mean that a lot of the software will be enabled to do e-invoicing quite quickly. And Martin, I noticed you were at a local government session yesterday. How did that go in terms of response? I assume you did talk about e-invoicing and that you were talking about digital, I think.
Yes. Yeah, no, I spoke about e-invoicing at the local government professionals annual meeting on Tuesday, and the response from them was overwhelmingly positive. If you look at, we've got obviously 3 tiers of government here in Australia. Federal government, whilst we're very large, we don't have a large number of invoices out to businesses and that sort of stuff, or receiving invoices from business. But when you start to look at the state and local governments, where they're providing infrastructure services to citizens every day of the week, they've got a very large group of suppliers and customers in that cohort. So getting local government and state governments on board is definitely a key part of our adoption strategy.
Great, thank you. And Martin, on that point, you've got a thing called the PEPL Capabilities and Associated Services Panel. Do you call it the PCAASP? Just checking.
we use acronyms for everything, absolutely. No, we're just calling it the e-invoicing panel. But what we've done to make, as many people probably would be aware, the procurement process within government is quite cumbersome and time-consuming sometimes. So what we have established is a whole of government panel that can be accessed by any government entity at any level of government, to access a panel of service providers that can assist them with adopting e-invoicing services. So we've got 20 odd suppliers on that panel at the moment, and they're basically ready to go and help agencies implement e-invoicing.
Right, thank you. And I know that Treasury's published a consultation paper last month.
That's right.
Dave? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So Treasury, as part of the budget announcement that Brady was talking about, they mentioned that the government would be consulting on options to mandate e-invoicing across the business community. And that's what that consultation paper that's been released is talking about. It's options for basically how do you drive adoption of e-invoicing across the economy, and responses or comments back to that are closed on the 18th of January. So if you are interested in providing commentary back to Treasury on that one, I would encourage you to do so.
Yeah, and let me say, you don't have to write a long commentary. You can put in a couple of paragraphs. I'd be very happy to hear from. Any comment on that, David or Kate, on that consultation paper and the mandating?
Look, I think the mandating of it, look, I can put a comparison with this in terms of benefit with single touch payroll. There's a lot of grumbles from employers when single touch payroll came in that, it was going to have to be really difficult to report your pay runs to the ATO every week and was going to cost an arm and a leg and all the rest of it. But when you look at where that's landed up, with single touch payroll being the thing that underpinned JobKeeper, which would have been really hard to implement without it, it's become something of national significance. We, of course, have done a lot of work with single touch payroll over the last few years, and we work with about 100 payroll providers to bring that on board. And bringing in JobKeeper was reasonably painless process compared to what it would have tried to do that manually. It would have been just about impossible, I think. And as it turned out, it gave the ATO really good control over what was going on in the space, and we had a really good visibility of what was going on in the employment market. So I think that e-invoicing will have the same benefit to the business community generally on that. Would you think that's the case, Kate, with your...
Peter, as we know, the three options in the paper are phased in over a period of time for all businesses, just focusing on big businesses or having fundamentally a non-regulatory approach. Well, I'll put a big cross through the non-regulatory approach to start with, because it simply won't happen or not happen in anything like the timelines that we want to. So you get to whether it's option one or option two, whether it's just the big end of town or it's everyone. I tend to agree with David. When you look at the benefits of single touch, and, I had real concerns about single touch payroll, and we have had to put in place mechanisms for those really little businesses that, simply aren't going to have software packages and so on, to be able to do it through their accountants and so on. So you've got to have options for the little guys. But I think now we know, as a result of COVID, that digitisation of business is so important. We know that digitised businesses are, 30% more likely to be growing, 20% more likely to be employing. Their capacity to weather the storm of COVID has been significantly higher because they've been able to pivot, get online. They've had a capacity to continue conversations with their customers through social media and other things. So I think I look at this as being sort of part of the digitisation package, which will make the majority of small businesses more profitable and more likely to be growing going forward. And I think that's something that we should embrace.
I agree.
The phase-in has got to be reasonable, though. And sorry, just one thing. By the middle of next year, the majority of software packages that small businesses use will be e-invoice enabled. So it'll already be there. So your costs of implementation will be minimal.
Thank you. And the other benefit, of course, from all of this is something close to our hearts, I think, Kate, is late payments. Faster payments. I mean, that means we can pay the tax office faster. I'm assuming the tax office would love that.
No. Yeah, well, I'm sure that they will. We won't go down that path, will we?
No.
But look, payment times. When I first took this job, which is nearly 5 years ago, or 5 years in March ago, we went out and did some consultation of small business, and Peter, you were part of that, and we asked small businesses what they wanted us to focus on. And I thought there'd be industrial relations, how rotten the ATO is. No, that's not true. But what they said right across Australia, it was payment times. That the time it took to get paid, particularly by big business, but at the time governments as well, was getting longer and longer. And that was causing them enormous problems with their cash flow and with their businesses generally. And although things have improved, and certainly government has improved a lot. You know, the federal government is now at 20 days and will go to 5 days for e-invoicing. New South Wales government, similar. And, you know, other, I think Victorian government announced that they're going to pay small businesses in 10 days just this week. So governments are doing some smart stuff. But I'd have to say the business community, there's some good players, but, you know, a lot of work still has to be done in that space. And Xero did a whole lot of work not so long ago, because they've got such a great database and real-time database, finding that half of invoices to small businesses were paid late. The impact upon working capital was about $7 billion a year for these sorts of late payments. Different industries were different, but we got some, you know, really up-to-date data just recently in the last week or two from Creditor Watch, and they're saying that in October, payment times were 150% higher than they were in October 2019. So we've seen the impact of COVID pushing out payment times for lots of businesses. You know, the average late, it's you know, over 30 days late. So if you've got 30-day payment times, that means you're not paid till 60 days plus. In some industries, that's 90 days. And right at the moment, as we know, Peter, so many small businesses are right on the edge. You know, they're really struggling. You know, a lot of them haven't been open much this year, or have had significantly reduced customer flow. And still, you know, the social distancing rules are really hard for lots of businesses. So add slow payments on top of that, you've got a toxic mix, really. So the great bit about e-invoicing is there's no check and there's no mail. So the check can't be in the mail. The capacity of getting your invoice to the right person, you know, you will get it to the right person. Another piece of work that we and others did recently was the reason for late payments was fundamentally dumb stuff, like 20% of invoices went to the wrong person in the big company and ended up in somebody's, you know, drawer or out tray or whatever. 30% had wrong information. You know, sometimes it was really minor wrong information, but enough to slow down the payment quite significantly. You know, that they put in the ACN, not the ABN, you know, stuff like that can't happen with e-invoicing. You know, it will get to the right person and it will have the right information and it will be secure. So that's pretty important, isn't it?
It is very important, and it's interesting because the government's got the Payment Times Reporting Act, and Kate and I spent a lot of time around that, working with people. Brady, how's big business responding to this payment time issue? You got any?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here nodding my head. I mean, a lot of what I just heard Kate say is actually coming through some of the latest anecdotal kind of information that we're seeing since payment times reporting was announced. So first thing I'll say is that it certainly hit the desired objective in terms of the transparency and the attention that it gets at kind of board level at some of the largest businesses in Australia. We've had, and I was just mentioning, you know, before we came online, we've had quite a lot of conversations with quite a lot of ASX listed large businesses in the ASX 200 and beyond. And almost to a T, everybody is looking at this now as a really good reason to get under the hood and sort of see what the data is telling them in real life. So if we did a dry run of a payment times report in kind of December 2020, what would it say? And what we're starting to see is everything that Kate just described. So what we're seeing a lot of is a gap between invoice date and accounting posting date, right? So that indicates to us when we dive into the data with a number of our clients that there are issues, which is obviously what Kate's identified in invoice processing. And they are things like invoices being, I've got one client where we saw a process which wasn't through a PO environment where invoices were issued to a central mailbox. It was a PDF invoice. But then it would need to go to the business approver to get it approved. So the whole point of consolidating a procurement function, then to have it pushed out to a business owner that has to then click on a button and make it approved, like that process just added days, right? So there is a significant delta that we're already seeing between invoice date and accounting date, right? So e-invoicing is the perfect antidote to this. What I would say is the complexity of procurement functions in large business, and probably also in government, and probably in a number of smaller businesses too, is still quite high. And the issue that we see is that there are multiple ways in which you can send invoices today, right? You can send in the mail, check in the mail kind of point, Kate. We can send PDFs by email. We can send, or we can have EDI channels, which is, as David mentioned, which are bespoke to particular procurement and particular customers. And if we add Pepple on top of that, we now potentially add a 5th or a 6th invoice channel, right? And so while we are 100% wholeheartedly supportive of the efficiency gains, and I think we should be chasing efficiency gain and faster payments, get people paid faster, we've just got to be careful that we don't throw another channel over the top. You know, and I think this is part of the magic around this consultation with government and getting this balance right. I think over time, what we need to do, and this might be controversial for some of the technology providers on the audience, but we need to start to think about how we can take some of those other channels away and have, you know, effectively the network effect kick in for the e-invoicing to deliver the maximum benefit for everybody. So I think there's some work to do, not only on when and how we should roll it out, but what we should do in terms of phasing out other invoicing channels and driving that network adoption effect, which will give benefit to everybody. You know, obviously, as I think David might have mentioned, or Kate might have mentioned, you know, got 2.5 million odd small businesses through the small business accounting software packages that will be enabled, you know, fairly soon. We've got a large business community that's pretty much supportive, almost to a T, like I said before. We've got government wanting Amanda. I think the forces are now starting to align. If we can look after the little guys and as Kate described, and sort of, you know, focus on the cost and making sure we can manage that particularly through COVID and the adoption, you know, through the micro business sector, and get that right, I think you will see kind of the confluence of events that might start to drive efficiency gains and also getting people paid faster.
Yeah.
One thing I'd just like to add there, which I agree absolutely. So I suppose what I'm talking about is, I think, option one, that everyone's in, but it's phased over, you know, a reasonable period of time, but not too long. Because single touch payroll showed that you know, that it was about taking away other ways of reporting. You can't report with an email. You have to do it electronically, and if you can't, then you've got to get, you know, somebody else to do it for you. But the actual mechanism that it has to be electronic is real, and I think that was a smart way to go, rather than just put another layer on top.
Yeah, and you mentioned lifting the hood. I mean, one thing I learned early on in this whole trip was that for a big business, what they say, once you lift the hood up, it's probably cost you $1 million already. So you want to do as much as you can while you've got it open. And so it was interesting to hear that approach from big business. And quite a few CEOs, you know, embarrassingly to them, but good on them, they said, look, we didn't get it. You know, sitting on a big board, you're seeing a lot of figures. You don't see the human being at the end of it. So there's motivation, not from everybody. I mean, the international big businesses have other issues about communications overseas, etc. But certainly there's desire to do it. I guess people want to do it in a way that makes sense, and e-invoicing is going to be a way through that.
I would agree with that, and I think, you know, I would think, yeah, most of the large businesses, almost all of the large businesses in Australia, would want to do the right thing by their small business customers. I think we're seeing that sentiment. Yep. You know, the BCA payment code is an example of that. Yep. You know, obviously the BCA is trying to drive greater adoption through its membership onto that code. So I do think that's there, and I think there is, you know, operationally complex environments, a myriad of payable systems for the biggest corporates, right? I'm talking about, like, there is a dense subsystem environment that sort of sits under that hood, which needs to be captured, right, and to be aligned from an invoicing perspective. The other reason why it's a good time to be looking at this is because a lot of large businesses are moving through finance transformation at the moment, because of this once in a generation kind of effect around the cloud providers moving ERP providers moving to cloud. So a lot of, over the next 5 or 6 years, you'll see a lot of large ERP customers moving. And it's a good time to address e-invoicing at that point, right? Because you don't want to make a change twice. So the kind of the timing of the mandate, I think, is quite nice.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I've got a few questions coming in, so I think we move on to the fraud and security stuff. And Kate, we mentioned that back towards the beginning of this, is that ScamWatch BSC scams netted 5.3 million across Australia. We're hearing about what things are going with scams, etc. And it's a very hot topic. We had a visit from I forget what it's called, the scam place run by the government, and they're doing a lot of work. Martin, as the head of e-invoicing in Australia, what can you tell us about the security and the governance of the PEPL network in Australia and New Zealand? What's it like?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. It's a good question, and it's a multi-layered approach to security. There's no one silver bullet, unfortunately, that fixes all of the security issues and fraud issues. But at a high level, the sending of an invoice across the PEPL network between two parties is a secure transaction, between the two parties. We, as the ATO, as the Australian PEPL Authority, accredit service providers to operate. So it's not a free-for-all. Not everybody can become an access point or a service provider and provide e-invoicing services. You have to go through an accreditation process that the ATO runs. And as part of that accreditation process, we have taken the security framework that we apply at the moment to all of the service providers who connect to the ATO to provide accounting, payroll, superannuation services, and that sort of stuff. We apply that same security framework to service providers looking to become accredited through e-invoicing. So it's one that we have a high degree of trust in. The other part to it is that we know who all, when you send and receive an e-invoice across the network, we know who that invoice goes through as it transitions through the network, and we know where it's coming from. So if you did ever identify a fraudulent invoice that was issued by somebody that shouldn't have, we can track that back through the network and ensure that they're turned off in the future. So you don't have the same problems or challenges that exist at the moment with email scams where invoices can be intercepted, or that you can have invoices coming from a completely made up person.
Yeah, so it's fraud proof.
I wouldn't go so far as to say entirely fraud proof, but when you look at it compared to the existing system, it is significantly better. We have a lot greater controls in place, and over time, those controls will harden, will increase as we address security vulnerabilities and those sorts of things. But from where we are today, it's a significant improvement.
Okay, we've had a few attacks, as we know, big attacks from foreign governments by the look of it. Is the PEPL network, is it going to be classified as part of our national infrastructure?
It's not currently classified as part of our national critical infrastructure. It's probably a good question to ask though, for the future. But that has a specific meaning and a specific definition. So we'll need to look into that in the future.
Yeah, it is important. I mean, and what happens to the data? I mean, these are the sorts of questions that not every small business asks, but certainly people say, hang on, where's the data? What happens to it?
One of the things is, and Martin will back this up, that the ATO, it's not the ATOs. they don't, even though they're doing an important role, they don't see or keep data, do you, Martin?
That's correct, Kate. So, and I think that's really important. The ATO's role, and the reason why we were asked to be involved in this is because of our strong relationship that we've got at the moment with service providers that provide tax services to businesses, accounting software and payroll software and that sort of stuff. We have a really wide network of service providers that connect to our systems at the moment. We've got close to 500 that interact with us, and it's for that reason and the trust that we have established in that relationship that we were asked to step in and lend a hand in essence to facilitate lots of different service providers working together. Because sometimes, as Peter and Kate and David, you would know through the Digital Business Council days, it can be quite challenging to get lots of different commercial entities with different competing interests to work together on something. And so that's why ATO stepped forward and said, we'll take this up and assist. And we think that it's going to be a massive benefit for the entire Australian economy. At the end of the day, being public servants, that's what we're here to do, is to help.
Yeah, and you're very good at it too, in my opinion. David, you're on the security committee of the GNGB. Can you explain what the GNGB is first? And how are we going to go? We're getting more secure and more safe from cyber attacks.
Yeah, look, the Gateway Network Governance Body is the organisation that's set up to oversee the Superstream network, which handles all the Superstream superannuation contributions going through Australia, from employers to funds. Obviously, there's a huge amount of value in that data, and particularly with rollovers, where you're transferring money from one fund to another, you can have an awful lot of money going through that network as well. So security is absolutely paramount around that. The PEPOL network is to some degree founded on exactly the same framework as the GNGB was, the Superstream network was founded. So we've had a lot of experience with this. In fact, we've had more experience with PEPOL in these technical networks that is now the backbone of PEPOL, because we set one up in Australia 6-7 years ago now, started in 2013. So we have an awful lot of experience with it. I was one of the founding directors of the Gateway Network Governance Body, and have since stepped down from the board, but I'm still acting as an advisor to the Security Committee, which meets every month and just looks at risks and ascertains what we need to do to continually improve the framework, because it's a constantly evolving space out there. Now, the PEPOL network is also on the same framework now as what the GNGB and the Superstream network is running on. It's heavily encrypted. There hasn't been an intrusion into the Superstream Gateway network in 6 years that I'm aware of, or 7 years that I'm aware of. So it's a pretty robust type of infrastructure, fairly well trusted around the world now. And I think that that's going to stand us in good stead for going forward in the e-invoicing space, because the framework there is very robust. As Martin said, nothing's ever going to be 100% proof, but because of the way the framework's structured, it's in pretty good shape, I think. We've also been having some conversations with some AI companies, artificial intelligence, who have built mechanisms that will look for pattern matching to sniff out fraudulent invoices and that sort of thing. And I think we'll see more of those applications evolving over the next few years as well, to try and avoid some of the scams that have happened in the past. And we keep getting them all the time.
Great.
I think
Kate, any comment on that? I mean, it's anybody else got a comment around the security?
Yeah. Sorry, Peter. I was just going to add one last thing. I mean, one of the things that I find really great about PEPOL, and particularly in the context of kind of fraud and cyber risks and so on, is not only do you kind of force everybody onto the grid in the way that Martin and David explained in terms of the digital identity and the mailbox and the authentication, but what it also does, and David, I think you were just intimated to this, is it straightens up and standardizes the type of information that you receive through the protocol, which then enables businesses to do more checking. So, for example, one of the fields that is available as a best practice in Australia under the PEPOL localization is as a requirement to provide bank account details, BSB, and account name, which then enables buyers to then test and check what's coming through the invoice line against the master file, and making sure that those bank account details line up. So you get better information to run better controls and testing, to kind of identify fraud, because of the quality of the information.
Yep, and David, I get the impression it it gives the competition between the software developers means they're going to look at what we need out in the business community and start developing even better things to help us through. Would that be fair comment?
Yeah, look, I've always seen this e-invoicing marketplace, because you're talking about 2.4 billion transactions a year as a starting point. It's going to become a commodity marketplace where the transaction in itself, shifting it from point A to point B, is going to become very, very low value, but the data in it is going to become very high value in terms of what you do with it when you get it. And being able to really do, because you've got to remember, you're getting all the line item detail, you're getting everything on the invoice. So you'll be able to do a lot more comprehensive analysis and inspection of that data, whether coming in electronically through a data feed like that. And I think you'll get much more reliability of information and accuracy.
Okay. Now we're going to move on to big business versus small, but I think we covered that already in some of the conversations we've had about those sorts of things, because there's a few questions there, and if it's okay, I might head to question 1. Oh, hang on. Yeah, so we're coming to the Q&A now. And you'll see on the screen now, we've got some useful resources. Please take note of them. As I said, there'll be a recording of this available anyway, but some of those government resources are really good, and you might have to dive into it in different ways, but they're very good resources. But the first question I got is to David. How does it integrate with ERP systems of large business where workflows are in place as part of their controls?
Well, look, we're working with about 35 odd software providers at the moment to implement the invoicing, and one of them in particular comes to mind. They're an accounts payable automation system that's plugged into a wide variety of ERP systems, and nearly, I think from memory, they said that 95% of their invoices are coming in PDF and OCR scanned. Obviously, getting the data in to them instead of having PDFs coming in and OCR scanning is going to give them quicker processing and much more accurate and much richer data. So they're really enthusiastic about this, and they're ready to go into production literally as we speak. We've found that the implementation cost of this hasn't been that high for most of the software providers that we've dealt with, because I think, again, STP gave them familiarity with building volume XML documents out of their payroll software. So they've already got and they've done the REST API without going too technical, but a lot of the work that they have to do, they already did with single touch payroll. So it's a subset of that, basically, with a different data set, obviously. But if they've got the right tools provided to them, they can implement this pretty quickly. We've had some of them, do it within weeks, basically. It's not months and months and months of work to do this. And that's why I think we'll get reasonably rapid take up of it next year.
Great, thanks. I remember being on the Standard Business Reporting Advisory Committee. That's 10 years ago. Oh, yeah, no further than that. So, gee, we've moved so quickly in a short time now, once it took a while to get there. Question 2, what about mid-tier businesses that use on-premise systems? It might be difficult to enable for those not using standard Xero and MyOb software. You want to answer that, David? Or
yeah, well, I can speak from experience of that, because alongside OZEDI, we also have an accounting system called Landmark, which is, dare I say it, 40 years old this year. And if we've still got clients running that software, it's a legacy software that's written, and we have a lot of products out there that we're dealing with that are written in old languages and that sort of thing. We've implemented e-invoicing and are about to release it to our client base so that they can embark on e-invoicing. And that's all on-premise software running a legacy accounting system. We've got a number of providers like that we're integrating with at the moment from the OZEDI perspective. So we, I guess, can see it from both sides of the fence, because we're an ERP provider as well as a messaging provider. We see the whole flow data going through it, and we've done it with both ends of the spectrum. Single touch payroll, again, we dealt with a lot of old systems that were all based around the desktop, and we implemented SDP successfully with those as well. So there is no barrier. There's basically no barrier to anyone implementing it.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for that. Now that we come to costs, now here's question 3. What are the costs to transfer the invoice data? Does the sender incur the cost?
That's a question for me as well.
I'm looking at I'm looking at you.
How come I get all the questions? You're looking at the camera, Peter, not at me. Look, there are a variety of cost models associated with this, depending on the services that are being applied to it. And we've seen this right across the spectrum of the clients that we're dealing with, the software providers that we're dealing with. Some of them are providing a huge amount of value-add services to the data that they're getting. The cost of actually transmitting it across the network is minimal. And there are two sides to every transaction in this network, of course. So the sender is actually going to pay a cost for sending it. The receiving of it is obviously a more complex thing, because you've got to allocate costing parameters, and you've got to run a whole lot of checks through on it to make sure that the invoice adds up and all the rest of it, that you want to make sure the data's right before you actually push it into an accounting system. So there's various levels of services available for that, and they all have their own pricing models. And it's a bit too complex to go on with that in detail, but there is one of the things that we are doing is the e-invoicing activation site is going to have an index of all those solutions on it, together with, if they want to publish their prices on it, they can. So that's going to be a catalogue of services that are available on the e-invoicing spectrum, which will be released over the next month as we finish off building the database for that.
Yeah, and Kate, I don't know what you reckon, but with anything new, you get this at the beginning, you get a whole range of different prices that come out there. We're seeing it with buy now, pay later and a few other things. Is that something the Ombudsman will be keeping an eye on?
Look, absolutely, Peter. But, you know, I always find this stat really amazing, but 89% of invoices sent by SMEs are still paper-based. Now, you know, and you look at it and go, you know, really? I mean, those could be sent electronically, but fundamentally they're, you know, they're you know, paper sent on the internet, or alternatively actually in the mail. So when we look at it, yes, there'll be, you know, obviously this isn't free, but in comparison to the costs at the moment of the way we're dealing with invoicing generally, and the fact we can get paid quicker, and it integrates directly with our software systems, and I'm speaking as an SME, you know, the cost savings are just extraordinary. But there will be a market here. There will be companies, and already are, that are focusing on SMEs and what's going to work for them. In the government consultation paper, they give a range of scenarios. So it's only the consultation paper is only, it's about, you know, 19 pages long, but about 15 pages of actual reading. So it's quite short for a government consultation paper, which I think normally they make them so long so no one ever reads the whole lot of them. But this one's quite short, and it does give a number of scenarios of the sorts of small to medium businesses that will implement. You know, if you've got a mild or a Xero, or, you know, an enabled software package, then obviously the costs are different than if you've got a desktop on premises accounting system, or if you've got nothing, you know. But it does go through those and explains what they might look like. But again, as David said, the costs will vary depending on how many invoices you're sending, how big your operation is, but it's going to be a damn sight cheaper than what it's costing SMEs now.
Yeah,
And
it'll
it
be
is.
a fraction of the cost of what.
Yeah.
Putting an invoice in an envelope, it'll be a fraction of the cost to send it via e-invoicing.
Yeah, that will. It's fantastic. Martin, I've got one for you. Will the ATO use this to catch businesses out, for example, for misreporting GST?
No, so as Kate mentioned earlier, the ATO doesn't see or receive any of the invoice information that's going between the two parties. That is between the two parties. It doesn't come through to or flow through to the ATO at all. We do think, though, that one of the common problems that taxpayers and small businesses tell us is how much time that they spend on the weekends or late at night keying in all of their information into their accounting systems and then reporting that at the end of the month. That's a whole lot of time that e-invoicing will save for them, eliminating a lot of that data entry. And so we actually think it'll be, make it easier for people to, ultimately meet their tax obligations and that sort of stuff. So it's a side benefit for us. But in terms of the question around, do we see the actual invoice data? No, that's not the case.
Great, thank you. And just quickly, one of the things that someone told me early on was that when the tax office is doing its work, checking things, that if a business isn't using e-invoicing, they're going to find that odd eventually and ask why. Is that something that might be a red flag to the tax office?
Look, I think we're really early days in the in the grand scheme of things at the moment. Once we get to very widespread adoption of e-invoicing, if there are people that are not on the network, we probably would find that a little bit odd. There may be some very good reasons for that. So it's probably, I probably can't say, yes, that's a red flag to us, but it might be something that we look at sometime in the future, but I think that's a long way off.
Right, thank you. And the next question probably take us right through to the end then. It's anybody can answer, but I think Brady and David, it's probably in your area. There's obvious benefits for business to business, B2B. The benefits for business to consumer, is there a benefit there?
Oh, look, the problem with that is that you don't have a means of identifying the consumer. With a business, you've got an ABN or you've got an NZBN in New Zealand, so you know who you're sending it to and who you're dealing with. But at the moment, unless the government decides to allow us to use MyGov ID for that, which is highly remotely unlikely, we don't have a means of identifying an individual. Now, when you look at people with investment properties and things like that they own in their own name, it'd be really nice for them to be able to get their invoices in that format if they were registered with GST. But I don't see it as happening in the short term. No.
Okay, thank you for that. The other one quickly is, what if I'm sending an e-invoice and the people at the other end don't have the software to deal with that? What happens there?
You won't be able to send into the network, and your software should be checking that. There's a central index in the middle of Petrol that is like a white pages. You look it up, and if the business's ABN is registered, you can send them the invoice. The software that's sending the invoice should check that index before it sends it, and ideally it'll do what it's doing at the moment, send it out in an email with a PDF if it can't find it on the Petrol network. That's really the simple answer to that question.
And
if I
Peter,
know software development, sorry, go on. Brady,
no, I was just going to say, sorry to interrupt. I think that's the reason why, I guess we're with Kate, right, on the options. Option 1 or possibly option 2 with a very, very low threshold to kind of, deal with sort of the micro businesses around mandating, because if you don't mandate, you're going to have those scenarios, right, where you spend the cost and effort to get on e-invoicing and then you find that half of your supplier base or half of your customer base aren't enabled. Yeah. And that dilutes the impact, right? And so like a mandate, which is sensible and phased, that means that businesses of all shapes and sizes know when their counterparties are going to be on the system, gives us that network effect, which then drives the efficiency gain that we're all seeking. So I think that's probably one. I know a mandate can sometimes be a bit of a dirty word, but I do think that this enables us to get that network effect and the benefits for everybody sooner.
Okay, we're coming to 3 o'clock, so apparently these things finish very quickly. You must be careful. Let me thank the panel. It's been, I mean, I've learned a lot. I've been involved with this for years, and now I know something. So, Martin, thank you very much for turning up, and we, look forward always to working with the tax office. Brady Dever, partner in PwC Sydney, thank you again for your expertise. Kate, as always, it's wonderful to have you on these things. And David Phil, well done. Congratulations. I think this has been really informative. Everybody knows this has been recorded, and please, there's useful resources on the screen in front of you right now. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Peter, for facilitating. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.